welcome back to another edition of the SBK Betting Podcast. It's the last episode in August, and it really does feel today like we're coming to the end of the summer with the rain falling in bucket loads, and it's going to make a big impact on the going up and down the country. Really interesting, but very much needed and required, as we've had a very hot summer, and it's been a hot week or so for this podcast because there's been plenty of winners. York provided some fabulous racing performances, really top quality stuff. Had a fantastic time following it all through, and I'm sure that Ross Millar and Tom Collins did the same. Ross, importantly, nappered the whole week, was noble style, and despite being slow away and still very raw and green, he was massively impressive in the gym crack, setting up a really fascinating rest of the season for him. You must have been really excited watching that, Ross.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was really excited through the week that Royal Scotsman stood his ground. I thought that made him far more of an attractive price. And you'd have to say Godolphin, Charlie Apple were fairly bullish in the lead up to the race. They said they thought he'd step forward a bit. That was my concern really, was he a weak finisher or did he just get a bit tired at Newmarket? It was certainly the latter. He does look a little bit mad, doesn't he? Sort of runs around a bit, but I just love how powerfully he travels. I'd be keen to see him kept at 6 furlongs. I think they'll undoubtedly step him up to 7. Maybe the Champagne Stakes, maybe go retire him for the National Stakes. I think that's unlikely because ultimately I guess they want Guineas winners, but I'd be surprised if he stays a mile. He might well stay 7. I'd be surprised if he stays a mile. I think to stay a mile, you're going to have to harness him far more than he is at the moment. And I think you then inherently lose something of the ability of the horse. So looking much further ahead, I think he's far more likely to win the Commonwealth Cup than the 2,000 Guineas. But he's just a smart talent and an exciting horse to watch.
Yeah, they've got plenty of good 2-year-olds that they've unleashed recently, and they've got a lot to look forward to and try and having the nice headache of separating them all for the classier races come the end of the season. You also put up the Platinum Queen before she was supplemented for the Nunthorpe, and she ran a really brave and a big race to be second under Holly Doyle, and Holly Doyle confirmed what we could see in the paddock, that this is not just a 2-year-old. She is big and imposing, and she's just going to get better and better. And it sounds like it's the Flying Five next, because they're desperately keen to get automatic entry into the Breeders' Cup and back amongst her own sex at least, and her own age group. Ross, she's going to be very, very hard to beat.
Yeah, I think it shows how these horses progress, doesn't it? She bolted to the front and then slightly had eyes on stalks some way out, ran around a bit. I don't think that cost her the win, but I think she'd be much closer. I think she's a really exciting horse, and I think they're to be commended for the sort of brave way they're campaigning them. It makes it exciting for us. We didn't have to stump up the money to see her run. They did, and I'm glad they're rewarded, and let's hope more people sort of take brave options going forward, because it makes for a better spectacle for all us sat at home or at the races.
Yeah, I don't think Midland Park have got much to be worried about after winning the sales race, and they were spending plenty of it at the sales this week as well, so not need to worry about that. TC, you had Emiratiana placed at big odds, but also in the previous podcast, Solcombe. Now that was a performance, a seriously well handicapped horse, bolted up, stepped up and tripped under Holly Doyle. Another horse to be slow away, and also another one at good price for you, 28-1. I can't believe he went off at that John Leaper in the E-Ball. So some good, interesting handicap selections for you, TC. And I think that these will be races worth following, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, let's touch on Solcombe first. We've already mentioned Holly Doyle. I thought she rode brilliantly throughout the York E-Ball Festival, although she didn't even need to ride brilliantly on Solcombe because he missed a kick. I think anyone would have won on him. I think we could have put Ross on, and obviously Ross is a much more talented horseman than myself. I wouldn't have won on him, but Ross definitely would have. He had so much in hand in the Melrose. Those blinkers have really worked the Oracle. And yeah, Emiratiana ran really nicely in the Nunthorpe to finish 4th. John Leaper as well, a horse that I've never got right, but fortunately hit the frame. It was a pretty good week. We had a few nice winners between us. Hopefully those winners continue going into this Saturday.
Yeah, Ross also put up Phantom Flights, who I think has gone up about £11 in the handicap since that was success. And I like to say that I did put up Quickthorn before Stradivarius and Truchan was scared off by him. And looking at what happened, I'm not surprised. But I would have loved to have seen them all turn up together. And I think Hughie Morrison is he was more cross than happy about the fact that the true competitors weren't in that race. But Quickthorn was a very comprehensive winner of the Lonsdale, and also Alpinista. She really had to be tough. She had to be gritty, and she won the Yorkshire Oaks and deserved another Group 1 success. So all in all, guys, not a bad week of winners for the podcast, considering it's been patchy, it's been tough, but I think it all came together. Ross, quickly, any horses other than the obvious ones that you had already known about? Any ones that you put in your tracker after the York week?
No, there wasn't really, Jess. I thought there was plenty of fair racing. Nothing to me particularly stood out, I have to say.
TC, anything that you want to touch on just quickly before we move on to this weekend?
Yeah, I wrote a piece for SBK Betting Zone, our content hub, featuring 3 eye catchers over the week at York. I won't spoil it. If you want to go read that, then please do visit betting.getsbk.com. But I'll give you one of the names now, which is 3 Yorkshiremen. Now, he ran in the Convivial Maiden, a maiden that has produced lots of high-quality horses over the last 5 years. He finished 10th. And the fact that he finished 10th means next time he'll probably go under the radar in the market. But he was held up last at a track that clearly suited front runners and prominent racers. Jamie Spencer Road looked for a gap as soon as he started to engage 4th or 5th gear. That gap just shut right in front of him. Switched out to the left, the gap shut again. He didn't get a fair run of things. Spencer never really asked for maximum effort, and he caught the eye with that real late finish in the final 50 yards. I think next time up, 3 Yorkshiremen's a very intriguing runner for Richard Fahey.
Okay, yeah, I think the Northern-based trainers really stamped their authority on British racing throughout the week. And for me, Queen Me for Kevin Ryan was certainly an eye-catcher, just her second run in the Lowther. She was only beaten a neck by Swing Along, a race that her dam, her granddam, had all won prior to her just getting beaten. But she's clearly a very talented filly, a daughter of Dubawi. And I think the Kevin Ryan team were really pleased with how well she did and how far she's come in such a short space of time. So that's my eye catcher and one to go into the track. And now, sadly, we're going from a week of brilliant racing, competitive action, good fields, and good quality to a slightly damp squib this weekend. And that's not just the weather, but also small field sizes and a lot of racing, but not enough real good top quality action, which is a bit of a shame. There could have been plenty of options to have chosen, but looking at the declarations, there are a lot of races that aren't betting propositions at all. So we're going to focus on the Beverley Bullet, which probably from just in terms of the numbers that are turning up, and that's only 13, that's probably the best puzzle to try and solve. But I would have to say, TC, looking through it, I don't think it's in anything of a vintage renewal. And there's a standout horses in terms of official rating is Tis Marvellous, last year's winner. Is it that straightforward?
I think so, but I think this is a tricky race to assess because it's not just about, who's the best horse. This is Beverley. And people who don't often bet at Beverley, there are different factors and angles you need to look at for the Beverley Bullet. I mean, speed tends to be the number one play, and that will be my number one angle, early speed in this race. I mean, you have to look back to 2015 for the last time a horse won the Beverley Bullet that was placed worse than 5th at the halfway stage. So if you've got early pace, if you're front runners, you have a big advantage in this kind of race. People also tend to look at the draw, which is fair enough. I mean, if the ground stayed good to firm, then I'd definitely want to be in a low draw. But we saw a couple of years ago when the ground went soft, that they came down the middle. The draw didn't really matter. I mean, I think lower the better, but at the same time, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the draw. I'd put the emphasis on the speed. So Tis Marvellous, as you touched on, won this race last year. It was an absolute romp. I think he won by 3.5 lengths and never really looked in danger. I think he's definitely the most likely winner of this again to retain his crown. Clive Cox has clearly targeted this race after running at Royal Ascot in what was probably the hottest race of the whole week, the King's Stand, won by Nature Strip. He finished 10th that day, but Tis Marvellous was never going to beat the likes of Nature Strip. He's just not that good a horse. The fact that he's been kept fresh for this race ever since, they've clearly had it in mind. They won the race last year. He doesn't come into this year's renewal with the same kind of form figures, but I wouldn't let that bother you at all. I think Tis Marvellous is definitely the most likely winner. But there is one other horse that I would like to play at the prices, and that's King of Stars. Now, as I say, I think the main angle is early speed, and King of Stars has that in spades. He's run to a rating of around 100 and all starts this season apart from 2, but those came at Chester and Epsom, 2 tracks he doesn't handle. He likes a flat galloping track. And now I know Beverley's not that, but it's definitely not like Chester or Epsom. It's not a tight turning left-handed track. So he's very consistent. And last week, 10 days ago, he ran at York Keeble Festival. He was drawn 22 in a big field sprint handicap. 22 was not the place to be. You wanted to be drawn low. That far side rail at York was just like a golden highway all week. He broke towards the stand side, tracked across, lost a lot of ground and momentum in doing so, but still finished second. I thought it was a highly creditable run, and he could be the main danger to Tiz Marvellous from the front.
Yeah, he just tinned, wasn't he? But he could do a just another bottle and just go and lead, and I think that set the race up perfectly for Tiz Marvellous last year. But there isn't a huge amount of pace outside of it. A lot of hold-up horses in this list, and Tiz Marvellous, as it stands, sort of heads the betting. We're recording on Thursday. Corker is one of the leaders in terms of a betting perspective, around 9-2, Existence 7-1, Liar Choice 15-2, Arecibo 8-1, Burning Cash 9-1, Mon Damage 10-1, and then 12-1 for King of Stars. So not a bad price for a horse that comes into this race in really good form as well, and that sometimes is key to sprinters. Ross, I think TC makes such a valid point about where you need to be in this race and how this race can pan out, and it really doesn't favour those hold-up types. Do you think the ground might be a factor? There's been plenty of rain around, and it looks like Beverley's getting a lot of what we're getting down south as well. Do you think that might put a
No, because
dent
he's
into
run well
chances?
on soft before, so I quite liked him from that point of view. My forecast showed plenty of rain today, and then not so much into tomorrow and Saturday. But we know not to rely on forecasts. So I did think he was versatile with regards to ground. I completely echo what TC said. I think he's got the standout claims here. He'd be my idea of the winner. But perhaps I'll add a little bit of shade to him. I wouldn't want to be going. I could see him going off a fairly short price. And if you're listening to this Saturday morning and he's, a shortish price, here's a couple of mild concerns I have in that both runs this year he's finished quite weakly the last half furlong. Now, the Group 3 at Newbury, you could explain that away. First start of the season. Wouldn't bother me. And then again last time, it's a Group 1. He could just have been on vapours because he was ridden fairly promptly, and he did make a proper effort at it, in behind the runaway winner. But he does wear a tongue tie. If these weak finishes are just a niggle with his wind, and you would generally tend to put a tongue tie on a horse that perhaps has a slight thickness in its wind, that's one mild concern. And then another slightly larger concern is the jockey, Paul Hannigan. He's not having a great season. His confidence is going to be lower than an English reservoir level. He's had a good strike rate this month, 3 winners from 13 rides. It's the 13 rides that concerns me, and that's 1 ride in the last 6 days. This is a guy that would regularly be riding 3 or 4 winners a day. On top of that, it sounds like he had a fairly torrid time in the BHA hearing on Wednesday, 6-hour hearing, picking his ride apart on the Riddler from the Norfolk, quite rightly so, but he's not going to be feeling great. And I just hope that he's able to use his experience, calm his nerves, not be too desperate about it, and get the job done. I think he will. If you were looking at one at a price, I'd perhaps chance Tenia Canyon from a nice inside draw. She has been ridden promptly. She's also been dropped out. I'd like to think from this nice draw on the inside, they'll ride her prominently. She stays further than the 6 furlongs. Beverley is a stiff enough 5. I think at a big price, she could just go well getting that £5 fillies allowance.
Yeah, interesting comments about Paul Hannigan. We'll get the outcome of that inquiry
sometime before Christmas, Jess.
Relatively soon. It's been playing on for a while. Yeah, it seems to be stringing itself out a little bit. Interesting that Adam Kirby, who's his regular jockey, despite Paul Hannigan riding him to win this race last year, heads to Newmarket, stays at home, I assume, for just 1 ride on a newcomer with Jane Chapel-Hyam. So read into that what you will, instead of taking his way all the way to Beverley. But yes, Tiz, interesting point about the slight negatives around Tiz Marvellous. Maybe he's just not really showed himself to as good a form in the 2 starts he's had this year than he was this time last year, where he was running quite a lot. But yeah, given a good break of 74 days by Clive Cox, who has probably picked up his form slightly, but it's been quite enough summer, if anything, for Clive Cox, I feel. So yeah, slight negative, I think, in my mind, considering I agree with Ross, he probably will be a short enough price. Interesting angles from TC and from Ross. I think there's probably a bit of value in here. Quick line on mine is that I've gone for maybe a little bit rogue. I'm not sure if this is going to be a real embarrassment or incredibly clever. Ainsdale, a horse that's been waiting for some give in the ground for all season. I'd imagine he's been withdrawn or a late non-runner due to the ground on a couple of occasions this season, or his best results have come on given the ground. I think that would be really key for him. He is a horse that can race pretty prominently, and I just think he could be a little bit overpriced at around 16-1. He's clearly a talented horse. He's one of the highest rated officially on 104, and that's the same rating as the 3-year-old Corker, who is my second sort of selection in this race as well, but isn't quick away, is a monkey. We'll need Ben Curtis to be as sprightly as he can be on this horse. Clearly very talented. Just could be a good thing considering he gets a little bit of weight off his elders, but will need to be quick away from gate 5. But I'm willing to risk it in a race where I'm going to be a bit more negative against the favourite, Tis Marvellous. So that's the Beverley Bullet. The sprint, the listed race at 2:40 at Beverley on Saturday. That's the main focus race we're going to look at. But as always, we're going to have a bet of the week from Ross and from TC. Start with Ross, considering your nap came through at York last week. So where have you gone to this Saturday?
So I've gone to Windsor, the 5:34, and it's a bit of a chancey nap, Jess. I was pretty confident about last week's one. This one, not so much, but I think she'll be a decent enough price. And it's the George Bowie train, Cashew. I think ground is absolutely the key to this filly. They're currently soft there with rain predicted, so I'm hoping it'll be at least soft. Both her career wins have come on soft ground. One of those coming over this course and distance. She had a really busy 2-year-old season. She ran 11 times, and she ran right up until the end of October. And I thought that showed in her early season form. You know, she was back out mid-April, so she wouldn't have had much of a break. And she looked pretty lackluster, pretty uninterested in a couple of runs. I thought last time at Lingfield, she took a big step back in the right direction, where crucially, she finished her race off very well. That was off a waiting ride over 7 furlongs. Both her wins have come off positive rides over 6 furlongs. She's ridden by Conor Planis, who claims 7. He's impressed me. I think he's looked quite composed, particularly when winning at Sandown last week on Muckatil for Ian Williams, where he was at work a long way out. I think that could suit this filly. I'd like to see him give a similar sort of ride, be positive, go for home early, and I think if she gets to the front, she'll be a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about Conor Planis. 3 wins from 15 rides for George Bowie, which good stats considering he's actually associated with Tom Clover, but George Bowie wants to make the most of that £7 claim. So Cashew for the nap selection for this weekend from Ross. TC, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to stick to Beverley. I think that's the best card for punting opportunities. And in the previous race to the Beverley Bullet, the 205, the Silver Cup, I really like a horse called Post Impressionist. He's a Shadwell cast-off. He's got stamina littered throughout his pedigree, and he made a good start to his career for William Haggis. He won in a romp at Ayr on his second outing before finishing second to Eldar Eldarov at Newcastle. He basically matched Eldar Eldarov's final 2 furlong splits that day, came from behind and closed the gap on the other horses that were ahead of him. Obviously couldn't make the inroads on Eldar Eldarov, but he subsequently won a Group 2, so he's a very good horse, and so is Post Impressionist. Post Impressionist since then went to Royal Ascot for the King George V Stakes. I really fancied him. He went off 4-1 joint favourite, but was far too keen, far too inexperienced. He was out the back, he was shifting left and right and just didn't run his race. Never really featured. Last time out, he disappointed as a short price favourite, but that was at Chester. I don't think the track suited. And also it kind of developed into a sprint. And this is a horse who's more of a grinder. He takes a few strides to get into top gear. Whereas that day, they went from cruising to full pelt, and he just didn't have the same acceleration. He now runs in the Silver Cup. This is the easiest race he is running since winning his maiden at Ayr. I think is a good thing. And William Haggis has a 29% strike rate with 3-year-olds at Beverley. So Post Impressionist in the 205.
That's an interesting stat. Always curious to see where William Haggis sends his horse, especially around something like Beverley, and Stevie Donoghue, I think, is doing pretty well when linked up with him. And right, so that's Post Impressionist in the 205 at Beverley for TC. My nap selection, which I always get a little bit nervous about, is Maxid in the Royal Windsor August Stakes at Windsor on Saturday. It's a listed race of 6:05. Back on the track, he won at first time out. We decided to go for this race instead of a handicap because I think that considering he went up £1 by sitting in his box after Solcombe bolted up in the Melrose, his form is working out really nicely from his last race at Goodwood. Secret State didn't do it any harm in the Great Voltigeur. The third and the fourth all ran really well in the Melrose, obviously as highlighted by Solcombe. So that form's looking good. We thought may as well give this a go against his elders, but he's in good form, and pleasingly we've got Tom Markman back on board as well, and changed around his bit too, which might help him settle a little bit better, and he's been a little bit keen. So a couple of things just might help him, and hopefully there'll be enough pace in this race set by Charlie Fellows' in Jazati. So fingers crossed for him. So that's my nap selection at Windsor on Saturday. Obviously, place plays as well. SBK has place only odds on all races. Sadly, again, this weekend isn't really the day for big field, nice juicy handicaps. But TC, there is a sales race. I know that you've got a selection for that. Is there some value in there?
Well, I hope so, Jess. I mean, I was looking through the cards, and as I say, like 4, 5, 6 runner fields, just no good for this section, the place section. And in sales races, unfortunately, you're generally dealing with 3 places. You may get the enhanced odds, but 3 places for play in like 22 runner fields is not ideal. However, this race, the 245 at Newmarket, is likely to be headed by Eddie's boy, who's already won a sales race, Miss Jungle Cat, Self-Praise, Wolverhampton, all of whom have run many times this season. Obviously, this is just for 2-year-olds. So the limit of their potential isn't as high as others. Of course, they have the best official ratings and therefore deserve to head the market. But there is a gap there for a lightly raced horse to come and surprise. There are 2 lightly raced horses in here that intrigue me. One's trained by Eve Johnson-Horton, who's not the pick, but the other is Amici, who is the selection for Ed Walker. Now, Ed Walker's team is flying at the moment, 25% in the last fortnight. Earlier in the season, he had a bit of a spell in the doldrums, so it's good to see them back running well. And Amici is closely rated to a horse that Ed knows really well and came from the dark. Now, I don't actually know the relation, but I think the Dam is a half sister to Came from the Dark. So there is a relation there. So Ed knows how this family do, how they perform on the track. And last time out, Amici, after a gelding operations, showed dramatic improvement at Kempton to beat 2 horses who had prior experience and much better form in the book. The second has subsequently won since. And that final furlong that Amici produced suggests that there's a lot more in the tank. It showed that he finally actually realised what he was doing on the racetrack, because on debut, he just had no idea whatsoever. He was out the back and he was really inexperienced in green. With a further progression likely in this race, I think he could potentially challenge the likes of Eddie's boy, who's obviously got much better form, but could prove vulnerable. So Amici for a place play in the 245 at Newmarket.
Yeah, I think really interesting horse, definitely improved from a gelding procedure. And I happened to be at Kempton that day and interviewed his owner, Lawrence Bellman, who said he's the next pot master. So he's got a lot of excitement around this horse, and clearly, as you say, Ed Walker did the right thing to geld him after that first run. So he's an interesting selection for TC in the sales race at Newmarket. Ross, what have you found?
So I've gone to Goodwood, 225. The old boy used to dance a lot. Runs this track pretty well. He's 2 from 5 there, and he's put up some decent performances. He was far too keen in the Lennox Stakes last time, but it was run at a moderate pace. Plenty were keen in that race, and it was run in a way that suited those ridden prominently. I think the only one that came from off the pace was Kinross, who finished second. So I'm happy to put a line through that. Before that, I thought his run at Pontefract was really impressive, given absolute lumps away to most of the field. Finished half a length behind Lampang, who's now 103 rated. He was giving him £3. Bergerac, who's won twice since and is now 93 rated, was about a length back in third, and he was giving him something like £15-16. He goes into a handicap now off a mark of 105. He was as high as 115 last year. Now he's come down the handicap because he's not as good as he was, but this is by some way the easiest task he's faced so far. If they go hard, as they often will in a handicap, I think he's primed to run a really big race. He's around about 16-1. I was tempted to put him up as the nap. But given the way Goodwood can be with traffic trouble, and given that he has to be ridden with restraint, I think you've got to have a place part to the bet in case he comes to the wet sail but meets a bit of traffic.
Okay, a bit of an old favourite there for Ross, and a good price too. I'm going to go back to the sales race and pick up one name that actually TC even mentioned. Not the selection for TC, but it has obviously caught his eye anyway. Boy Browning for Eve Johnson-Horton and Charlie Bishop. Eve's team, they've just done so well, especially their 2-year-old. She really knows how to pick a value one. And this horse, Frank, the form of Just Magic at Goodwood, when he was a real eye catcher at 66-1, went and bolted up at Windsor in a ordinary enough novice race, but that was really impressive. He's clearly on the up, and he's slightly like Amici in profile, and that they could be anything and less exposed than some of the 2-year-olds that they're going to face on Saturday. So that's Boy Browning is my place play for this weekend. So hopefully we found a couple in there for you. We're not over until we get a bit of a stat attack out of TC. And also I know that you've got your US podcast that's going to be coming central stage, because it's the best racing probably this weekend is over in Saratoga in the Travers Stakes. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that quickly after a stat attack, please.
Yes, Stat Attack, are you ready for this? We didn't have success last week, but this one is going to be successful. John and Thady Gosden have a 26% strike rate with their runners on the July course at Newmarket this season. That's a £1 level stakes profit of plus £12.82 if you back every one of their runners. Frankie Dettori has a 31% strike rate on the July course at Newmarket this season. 5 winners from 14 rides. Again, a level stakes profit. The pair team up, they just have one runner between them where they team up, and that's Spin Around. In the 2:10 at Newmarket, I fully expect this horse to win.
Okay, interesting. Insight from TC. Quick word on the Travers. Do you think it's a good option for Broome?
I mean, the whole meet at Saratoga this Saturday is going to be the big day. The Travers fantastic race features Epicenter, the leading 3-year-old Zandon in there, who was one of my favourite horses for the Kentucky Derby. Got beat in that race, finished third, but could come back and beat Epicenter, who finished second. There are loads of other top quality 3-year-olds in there, Cyberknife. And then you look at the other races on the card as well. You've got Jackie's Warrior running early on in the day. You've got the Personal Insign featuring most of the top quality 3-year-old fillies. Jack Christopher's running as well. I mean, one of my favourite horses in training. So if we're lacking quality in the UK, we're not lacking it in the US. Make sure you tune in for Saratoga on Saturday night.
Okay, more of that from TC on all the content that you can find on our YouTube channels, on our any podcast provider that you find. Thank you again to the guys for joining us. A reminder that new SBK customers can get £30 in free bets by depositing just £10. T's and C's always apply, and make sure to tell your friends. Hopefully we found a few winners to keep us rolling after a good and successful and profitable, I hope, York week. And thank you for joining us again, and we'll be back with you next week.